The stars were silent. Space was cold and endless, stretching farther than the eye could see. In that silence, a small alien ship drifted near the edge of its home system. The ship was damaged, smoke leaking from its broken engines, its crew struggling to keep it alive. Inside the command chamber, the alien captain pressed his trembling hands against the console. His race had never been fighters. They were builders, thinkers, dreamers. They believed in peace and trade. But peace had ended when the enemy came. The enemy ships were dark and cruel, cutting through their defenses with fire and steel. The aliens had tried everything: negotiation, surrender, even tribute, but the enemy only laughed and demanded more. Now their worlds burned one by one, and their people were running out of places to hide. The captain's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. His voice broke as he spoke to his crew. "We have no strength left. But maybe someone else will hear us." With slow movements, he activated the distress beacon. A signal burst into the void, carrying across the stars a simple, desperate message. "This is the Valari. We are under attack. Is there anyone who can help us?" The message repeated again and again, whispering into the endless dark. The Valari knew it was foolish. Who would answer? Who would care about a weak race on the edge of the galaxy? But still they sent it, for it was all they had left. Far away, light years beyond their broken skies, a human listening post floated quietly in orbit around a barren planet. The station was boring, manned by only a handful of officers who spent most of their days watching empty screens. 4 years, no signal had come, no message worth recording. But on this night, alarms began to flash red. The young operator on duty leaned forward, shocked. His headphones filled with strange, trembling words. It was not a language he knew, but the translation system began to decode it. "This is the Valari. We are under attack. Help us." His heart raced. He turned in his chair and shouted for his commanding officer. Soon the entire room filled with voices, officers crowding around the console, listening as the alien cry played over and over. Some shook their heads, saying it was a trick, some kind of trap. Others whispered that it was real, that these aliens were truly begging for their lives. The commanding officer stood silent for a long time. His face was hard, his eyes sharp. Finally, he gave the order, "Forward it to Earth Command." Immediately. And so the signal traveled again, carried on beams of light, crossing secure channels until it reached the heart of Earth. Deep under the surface of the planet, in a vast command bunker, the message was played before the leaders of humanity. The Valari voice echoed through the chamber, full of fear and hope. The humans listened in silence. Some of the leaders frowned, warning that this was not their fight. Why risk ships, soldiers, and lives for strangers? Others spoke passionately, reminding everyone that humanity had once been weak too, that they had survived only because they stood together. The room filled with arguments, but one thing was clear: the decision could not wait. Every moment meant more alien lives lost. Finally, the admiral of the fleet rose to speak. He was an old man, scarred by past wars, his voice calm but powerful. "They asked for help. That is enough for me. We will not turn away." The chamber fell silent. The decision was made. Outside in the void, the Valari continued their hopeless fight. Their cities burned, their skies choked with enemy ships. They had no idea that their call had been heard, no idea that far away, humanity was already moving. Across Earth and its colonies, massive preparations began. Fleets were armed, supplies loaded, soldiers briefed. Thousands of ships rose from their docks, casting shadows across oceans and cities. From orbit, the sight was terrifying and beautiful, an entire civilization rising to answer a cry from the dark. Back in the Valari system, the alien captain sat slumped in his chair. His crew looked at him with hollow eyes. Days had passed, and still no one came. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. Perhaps no one had heard. Perhaps no one had cared. But then, in the blackness of space, far beyond their sensors, a ripple appeared. Something vast was moving. It was still too far to see, but it was coming closer. The Valari did not yet know what it was. They did not know that humanity had heard their call. They did not know that the stars themselves were about to change. And in that moment, as the beacon continued to repeat its simple message, a story greater than any of them could imagine was beginning. The message reached Earth Command, and it spread like fire. The Valari's desperate voice played again and again in meeting halls, on secure screens, and in private offices of the most powerful men and women on Earth. Some stared at it with pity, some with suspicion, and some with anger. The cry for help was not just a request, it was a question directed at all of humanity. Would they act, or would they stay silent? In the central war chamber beneath the city, the leaders of Earth gathered around a great table. The air was heavy with silence as the voice of the Valari repeated in translation. This is the Valari. We are under attack. Is there anyone who can help us? For a moment no one spoke. Then arguments burst like thunder. One general slammed his hand on the table and declared that it was a trap. Why should humanity throw away its ships and soldiers for a species they had never met? Why risk everything for aliens who may not even thank them? He warned that the enemy attacking the Valari might be waiting for humans to arrive, hoping to destroy the fleet in an ambush. Others agreed with him, saying that Earth should stay cautious. But there were voices that rose against the doubt. A young leader from the colonies stood tall and spoke with fire. She reminded everyone of Earth's own history, how humanity had once cried for help during its darkest wars, how no one had come, and how they had survived only because they had chosen to stand together. If we do not answer, she said, then what kind of people are we? What will we tell our children when they ask why we turned away from a cry in the dark? Her words struck deep. Around the table, eyes shifted, some softening, some hardening, but all listening. The debate continued for hours. Every argument repeated, every fear exposed. Some spoke of cost, of ships that would not return, of soldiers who would never see their homes again. Others spoke of honor, of duty, of what it meant to be human in a galaxy filled with silence. The room grew louder, until finally a single voice cut through the noise. It was the admiral of the fleet. His hair was gray, his uniform worn with age, his chest scarred from battles long past. When he rose to speak, the room fell into silence, for all knew his words carried the weight of truth. He looked at the screen where the Valari message played. He studied it for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was quiet, steady, and strong. They asked for help. That is enough. He paused, his eyes meeting those of the generals and leaders around him. We are human. We know what it means to suffer, to bleed, to call out and be ignored. We will not be the ones who ignore. Not now. Not ever. The chamber was silent after his words. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The decision was made. Humanity would answer. Orders spread across Earth and its colonies like lightning. Messages reached shipyards, barracks, and starports. The call went to soldiers, pilots, engineers, and captains. Humanity was not sending a single ship, nor a token force. They would send their strength, their heart, their very soul. Across the blue oceans of Earth, massive carriers lifted into the sky, breaking free of gravity with engines roaring like thunder. Over the red deserts of Mars, destroyers powered up their weapons, glowing lines of energy running across their hulls. From the distant moons and outer colonies, frigates and cruisers joined the call, all pointing their bows toward the stars. Civilian volunteers rushed to aid the effort, bringing supplies, food, fuel, and medical support. It was not just a mission, it was a movement, a wave of determination that swept across humanity. In orbit, fleets gathered. Thousands of ships aligned into formation, rows of gleaming steel stretching farther than the eye could see. From the surface, people looked up and saw the dark shadows of warships blotting out the stars, and they cheered. For the first time in history, the entire human fleet was united under one purpose. On the command deck of the flagship, the admiral stood in silence, watching as the armada prepared. Officers called out reports, crews strapped into stations, engines warmed. The air buzzed with tension, fear, and pride. Humanity was not going to a war of its own. Humanity was going to fight for strangers. And yet, in the hearts of the soldiers, it did not feel strange at all. It felt right. Far away, the Valari still fought and suffered, believing themselves forgotten. They did not know that across the stars, an ocean of ships was already on its way. They did not know that an entire species had heard their cry and decided to stand beside them. In the quiet before departure, the admiral gave one final order, his voice steady and sure. Set course for the Valari system. Let them know humanity is coming. Engines flared. The fleet began to move. And as the stars shifted and blurred with faster-than-light travel, humanity's answer to the Valari was written in fire. The Valari homeworld was drowning in fire. Their skies once filled with calm silver clouds were now torn apart by black enemy warships. Cities that had shined with crystal towers were broken into rubble, their lights replaced by smoke and flame. In the capital, the Grand Council chamber shook with every strike from orbit, dust falling from the ceilings, lights flickering with each tremor. The Valari leaders sat together around a circular table, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. They had sent the message into the void days ago, begging for help, but no answer had come. Every hour the enemy grew closer, their blockade tightening around the planet like a noose. Supplies were running low, defenses collapsing, and people fleeing underground. The Valari were a gentle race. They had never built weapons for war. Their ships were made for trade, their energy used for science and growth, not destruction. Now those same ships lay shattered in orbit, burning wrecks that fell into the atmosphere like falling stars. In the council chamber, one elder stood, his voice trembling but strong. We must prepare ourselves. No one is coming. The galaxy does not care for us. We are alone. The words cut deep into the hearts of the others. Some lowered their heads in silence, tears glimmering in their eyes. Others struck the table with fists, demanding that they keep hope alive. We sent the signal. Someone must have heard us. We cannot be abandoned. But the arguments died as the walls shook again, louder than before. Outside, the enemy fleet pressed their assault. Their warships hung in the skies like dark beasts, firing mercilessly into cities below. On the surface, Valari soldiers, few in number and poorly armed, tried desperately to resist. They fired plasma rifles at towering enemy machines, but their shots bounced off thick armor. Families huddled in shelters, listening to the distant screams and explosions. Parents whispered to their children, telling them to stay quiet, telling them to stay brave. The children asked when it would end, and the parents had no answer. In orbit above the planet, the last of the Valari defense ships tried to hold the line. Their captain shouted orders, his voice hoarse. His crew fought bravely, pushing their fragile ships into impossible battles. One by one, they fell, but not without striking back. Every destroyed ship bought another few minutes for the people below to breathe. Still, it was not enough. The enemy advanced, cold and unstoppable. Their language was harsh, their demands simple. Surrender everything, give all resources, or die. The Valari had already tried surrender, had given food, technology, and even slaves, but the enemy always returned for more. There was no peace with them, only endless hunger for conquest. The Council knew this truth. Their race was standing on the edge of extinction. In the deepest shelters beneath the capital, thousands of civilians waited in the dark. The air was thick and heavy, water supplies running low. Some prayed quietly, though they had never been a religious people. Others sat in silence, staring at the ceiling, imagining the war raging above. Hope was fading, replaced by despair. Yet still, the distress beacon continued to sing into the void. This is the Valari. We are under attack. Is there anyone who can help us? It repeated again and again, even though most of the Valari had already given up believing in it. The beacon was the last act of defiance, the last whisper of survival. Outside the shelter, in the broken streets of the capital, the enemy soldiers advanced. Their machines stomped through fire and ash, scanning for survivors. A small band of Valari fighters launched a desperate ambush, striking with hand weapons and makeshift explosives. They managed to take down one of the enemy machines, cheering for a moment before the others turned and crushed them beneath steel feet. The Valari were brave, but bravery alone could not stop the storm. In the council chamber, silence fell once more. The elders could feel the end drawing near. One whispered softly, "If no one comes, we will be nothing but a forgotten people, erased from the stars." Another replied, "Then at least we will be remembered by ourselves. We will not surrender again. We will fight until the last." Their decision was made. The Valari would stand, even if they stood alone. Above them, the enemy flagship moved into position, casting a shadow over the planet. Its weapons glowed as they prepared to fire the final strike that would break the last defenses. The Valari closed their eyes, ready for the end. But at the edge of the system, far from their sensors, space rippled. A distortion spread across the void, faint but growing. Something was coming. Something vast, something powerful, moving with speed and purpose. The Valari did not yet see it. They did not yet know that the humans had heard their cry. They only felt the darkness closing in, believing this night to be their last. And in that terrible silence, the beacon still whispered into the void, unaware that its answer was already on the way. The Valari defenders had almost given up when their long-range sensors caught something strange. At first it looked like a faint disturbance at the edge of their system, a ripple in the background radiation, a shadow where there should be none. The operators in the control room stared at their screens in confusion. It was not an enemy signature, at least not one they recognized. One of them called out in disbelief, his voice trembling as he checked the data again. Something was entering real space, something massive. The Valari commander leaned over his console, his heart heavy with fear. He whispered to himself that it must be another enemy fleet. The stars themselves seemed to darken as the distortion grew, spreading wider and wider until shapes began to appear. Metal forms emerged from the void, one after another, glowing engines burning bright. The Valari gasped. Ships, hundreds of them, no, thousands, were pouring out of faster-than-light travel, filling the void with steel and firepower. The commander froze, unable to breathe. His mind could not accept what his eyes were seeing. For a terrible moment, he believed it was the end, that this was the final blow, the last fleet come to erase his people forever. But then the sensors brought clarity. The designs were unfamiliar. These were not the cruel, jagged vessels of the enemy. These ships were different, sleek, powerful, and terrifying in their order. Massive carriers loomed like floating cities. Destroyers and frigates spread in disciplined lines. Fighters swarmed like swarms of silver insects, forming protective screens. A formation of such precision, such size, that the Valari could not believe it was real. The commander whispered the words without meaning to. "Who are they?" A moment later, an answer came. Across all channels, a voice broke through, deep and calm, translated instantly by the system. "We received your call. We are here." The Valari control room fell silent. Every officer, every soldier, stared at the screen in shock. For days they had believed no one would come. 4 days they had prepared for death. And now, out of the darkness, a new fleet had arrived. A human fleet. On the bridge of the human flagship, the admiral stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the Valari system. His eyes hardened as he took in the burning cities on the planet below, the wreckage of broken defense ships, and the enemy armada still hammering the helpless world. He gave no grand speech, no long orders. He simply nodded to his crew and spoke 4 words. "Form the battle line." The humans moved like a single machine. Carriers launched waves of fighters, engines flaring as they shot into the void. Destroyers took flanking positions, their weapons powering up. Cruisers spread wide, forming shields of energy to protect the carriers. The entire armada shifted into formation with flawless coordination. The Valari watched in awe. Never had they seen such unity, such raw power brought together in one place. They had expected perhaps a single ally ship, maybe a small fleet at best. But what they saw now was an entire civilization, answering their call. The enemy noticed too. The dark warships shifted in confusion, their formations breaking slightly as they tried to understand what had appeared. Then, as if realizing that hesitation meant weakness, the enemy opened fire. Beams of red energy slashed across the void, striking toward the humans. Explosions rippled as the battle began. The Valari held their breath, watching, waiting, praying that this new force could stand. The humans did not flinch. Shields flared as the first enemy shot struck, but the fleet held steady. Then, with thunder, the humans answered. From hundreds of ships came volleys of plasma fire, railgun slugs, and missile storms. The void lit up with fire brighter than the sun's. Enemy ships shattered under the barrage, their hulls torn apart, their fleets thrown into chaos. The Valari cried out in disbelief as they saw the impossible. The humans were pushing the enemy back. On the surface, Valari civilians hiding in shelters saw the skies change. 4 hours, the heavens had been red with enemy fire. Now they burned with a different light, streaks of human weapons breaking through the clouds, tearing the invaders apart. Children pointed and cheered. Parents held each other, tears running down their faces. For the first time in weeks, hope returned. Back in orbit, the Valari commander activated his comms, his voice shaking as he spoke. "This is the Valari fleet. Whoever you are, thank you." The human admiral's face appeared on the screen, stern but calm. His reply was simple, yet it struck the Valari to their core. "You are not alone. Not anymore." More enemy ships warped into the system, desperate to overwhelm this new threat. The battle was only beginning, but the Valari no longer trembled in silence. For the first time since the war had begun, they were not afraid. Humanity had come, and the stars would never be the same. The void exploded with light as the battle began in full. Enemy ships surged forward, black and jagged, firing streams of energy across the stars. Their cannons spat fire into the human lines, shaking shields and tearing into the emptiness of space. But the humans did not break formation. They moved like one living thing, each ship protecting the others, each captain obeying the rhythm of a single strategy. The Valari watched from their ruined command center, their wide eyes filled with disbelief. For so long they had fought alone, weak and scattered, their ships destroyed one by one. But the humans were different. Their fleets were massive, disciplined, and unafraid. The first clash sent shockwaves through the system. Human destroyers darted into enemy lines, unleashing torpedoes that tore through hulls like knives through paper. Carriers launched wave after wave of fighters, swarms of small ships dancing between enemy fire, striking engines and weak points with precision. Massive cruisers poured plasma fire into the enemy flagship screens, while railguns from battleships sent metal slugs the size of buildings ripping into enemy armor. The Valari command channel filled with cheers as the impossible happened. The humans were not only holding their ground, they were pushing the enemy back. On the surface below, Valari citizens huddled in underground shelters heard the deep rumble of explosions above. For days, every strike had meant their own destruction, another city burning. But now, the sky shook for a different reason. The rumble of human weapons echoed like distant thunder, and for the first time children looked up with wonder instead of terror. "Who are they?" whispered one mother as she held her child. The child pointed at the flashes in the sky and said softly, "Our saviors." But victory was not easy. The enemy was furious, their armada vast and brutal. They regrouped quickly, surrounding human ships in waves. A cluster of human frigates was cut off, their shields collapsing under constant fire. Just before they were destroyed, a human battleship broke formation, charging headfirst into the enemy to protect its comrades. Its weapons blazed, its hull burning, until it rammed straight into an enemy cruiser, both ships exploding in a massive ball of fire. The Valari gasped at the sacrifice. To give one's life for another species, it was something they had never imagined. On the flagship, the human admiral stood tall, his voice calm as he issued orders. "Hold the line. Protect the planet." His eyes narrowed as more enemy ships warped into the system. This was no small fleet. This was an invasion force meant to erase a people. The humans had expected this, and they were ready. "Release the second wave," he ordered. From the carriers, new squadrons of bombers roared forward, their engines glowing bright. They broke through the chaos, diving into enemy formations, dropping payloads of devastating charges that split entire ships apart. Explosions lit up the black sky, each one a sun for a heartbeat. Still, the enemy did not yield. They pushed forward with endless fury, their largest warships cutting through the lines like predators. A monstrous flagship appeared, larger than cities, its weapons arrays glowing red. Even the humans felt the weight of its presence. It fired a massive beam that sliced through a line of human cruisers, turning 3 into molten wreckage in seconds. The Valari cried out in despair, thinking even these powerful new allies might fall. But the humans answered with fire of their own. The admiral gave a single nod, and the flagship's main gun charged, a rail cannon longer than most cities. With a soundless roar, it unleashed a projectile faster than thought, tearing through the enemy flagship's shields and piercing its armor. The giant did not fall, but it staggered, its engines flickering. Hope returned. Around the battlefield, the enemy tried to swarm human carriers, desperate to cut off their fighters. But Valari survivors, inspired by what they saw, launched their own small ships to help. Fragile and weak compared to the humans, they still dove bravely into the fight, distracting enemy interceptors, buying precious seconds. For the first time in history, Valari and human ships fought side by side. The admiral noticed and gave a rare smile. "They have courage," he said quietly. The battle raged on, hour after hour, fire and wreckage spreading across the stars. Human losses mounted, but their lines held. Every time a ship fell, another closed the gap. Every time an enemy broke through, a human captain sacrificed themselves to block the path. And slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. Enemy formations fractured, their confidence shaken. They had come expecting easy prey, not a united force of humanity's full strength. On the Valari homeworld, the shelters shook once more, but this time the vibrations came with the sound of enemy ships falling from the sky in flames. Civilians poured out into the ruined streets, staring upward as the heavens burned. Above, the battle neared its peak. The great enemy flagship turned its weapons toward the human armada once more, preparing a final devastating strike. Human ships shifted, readying themselves for the most dangerous moment yet. The Valari commander whispered, almost a prayer, "Please, do not fall. Not now." In the silence before the next clash, the admiral's voice echoed across his fleet. "This is humanity. We do not run. We do not hide. Hold fast." And with that, the humans charged. The enemy flagship loomed like a shadow over the battlefield, its weapons glowing with deadly light. Every ship in the system seemed small compared to its massive size. The Valari had never seen such a monster before. Even the human fleet, vast and powerful, looked fragile in its presence. The Valari commander whispered in despair, thinking the battle was already lost. But on the human flagship, the admiral did not flinch. He studied the enemy with calm eyes, his voice steady as he gave his orders. "We hold the line. No retreat." His crew answered without hesitation, hands moving across glowing consoles as new commands spread through the fleet. The humans knew what was at stake. If they failed, the Valari would be erased, their planet turned to ash, and humanity's promise broken. That could not be allowed. The enemy flagship opened fire. A colossal beam of energy swept across the void, striking straight through a line of human destroyers. 3 ships were torn apart instantly, their wreckage spinning into the darkness. Another beam slashed toward a carrier, shields flaring under the impact. The Valari watching from their bunkers below cried out in fear as the sky lit red with destruction. But the humans answered with fire of their own. Rail cannons, plasma lances, and missile barrages tore into the enemy's escorts, shattering cruisers and burning frigates. Still, the flagship advanced, relentless and unstoppable. It was clear that the humans needed more than firepower. They needed something greater. The admiral gave a grim command. Unleash the super carrier. Across the fleet, a massive ship shifted from its position. Larger than any other vessel, it had been held back until now. Its hull was scarred from old battles, its engines roaring like thunder as it moved into the front lines. Hatches opened along its sides, releasing a storm of fighters and bombers. Hundreds, then thousands, filled the void like a cloud of steel wings. They surged toward the enemy flagship, weaving through incoming fire, each pilot ready to die if it meant breaking the beast. Valari officers watching the scene were left speechless. They had never imagined such numbers, such coordination. To them, it was not war, it was like watching gods move among the stars. The fighters struck first, swarming the flagship's weapon arrays, blinding sensors, and distracting defenses. Bombers followed close behind, dropping charges that shook the giant's hull with each explosion. The flagship's shields flickered, its armor beginning to crack. The Valari gasped as they realized the monster could bleed. But the enemy was not idle. Their secondary fleets surged in to protect their flagship, tearing through human lines in brutal counterattacks. Several human cruisers were destroyed in minutes, their crews lost in fire. Valari pilots who had joined the fight fell one by one, their fragile ships no match for the storm. In the shelters below, Valari families listened to the tremors and wondered if this was victory or the end. On the bridge of the flagship, the admiral remained calm. "Stay with them," he ordered. "Every second counts." Human battleships began to make the ultimate sacrifice. Some already crippled and burning pushed themselves directly into enemy formations, ramming warships 2 and 3 times their size. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield, opening gaps in the enemy lines. Through those gaps, the bombers pressed closer to the enemy flagship, aiming at its heart. The Valari commander could hardly believe what he was seeing. These humans did not fight for conquest. They fought as if protecting their own blood. He turned to his crew and said in a hushed voice, "They are dying for us." His words carried both awe and shame. The Valari were a peaceful people, unused to such sacrifice. Yet here was an entire fleet giving everything to save them. The enemy flagship roared again, firing another devastating beam. This time it struck the human supercarrier. The great ship trembled, its shields collapsing. Fires raged across its decks as alarms screamed. For a moment it seemed the carrier would be lost, and with it the battle. But instead of retreating, the carrier pushed forward, closer to the flagship. The admiral gave the order. "All fighters, clear the decks. Prepare final strike." The surviving fighters scattered, engines burning as they pulled away. The massive carrier turned its nose directly toward the enemy flagship, its engines blazing at maximum power. The Valari realized what was happening. The humans were going to ram it. The carrier's crew did not hesitate. They stayed at their stations, guiding the ship into its final course. The enemy fired desperately, beams and torpedoes tearing into the supercarrier's hull, but still it came on. Flames engulfed its sides, armor breaking apart, yet it refused to stop. Then, with a blinding flash, the carrier slammed into the flagship. The impact shook the entire system. Explosions ripped across the giant enemy vessel, fire consuming its hull as chain reactions spread through its core. The Valari screamed in shock, in fear, and in joy. The monster was crippled. From the human flagship, the admiral gave the next order. "All ships, finish it." Every surviving human vessel unleashed its weapons. Plasma fire, missiles, and railguns hammered the burning flagship until finally, with a final roar, it shattered. The wreckage burned like a dying star, debris scattering into the void. Silence followed. The Valari stared at their screens in disbelief. The enemy flagship, the terror of the skies, was gone. Humanity had turned the battle. On the ground, Valari civilians poured into the streets, staring up at the sky filled with fire and wreckage. They wept, laughed, and shouted in voices filled with hope. For the first time in generations, they believed survival was possible. The enemy fleet, leaderless and broken, began to retreat. The humans had not only saved the Valari, they had changed the course of the war. And in the quiet aftermath of fire, the Valari understood one truth: The humans had come not just as allies, but as something greater. The battlefield was silent at last. Wreckage floated in the void, twisted pieces of metal drifting where once there had been mighty warships. Fires burned in the emptiness, glowing like dying stars. The Valari looked to the skies and saw something they had never thought possible. The enemy was gone. Their flagship destroyed, their fleets shattered, their power broken. For the first time since the war had begun, the Valari homeworld was free. In the command shelters deep underground, alarms went quiet. Officers sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the screens that showed the impossible truth. The humans had won. They had turned back an enemy that had seemed invincible. Some Valari wept openly, tears running down their faces as they realized their people would live. Others sat in silence, too stunned to speak. On the surface, civilians emerged from their shelters, stepping out into the ruined streets. They looked up and saw the human ships orbiting above like guardians. Children pointed at the glowing hulls, their voices filled with awe. Parents embraced, whispering prayers of thanks to the stars. For them, humanity was no longer just another species. Humanity had become something greater, a force that had answered when no one else had. On the bridge of the human flagship, the admiral stood tall, his eyes fixed on the wreckage of the enemy fleet. Around him, his crew celebrated quietly, though their faces showed the cost of victory. Many ships were gone, many comrades lost. But their mission had been clear, and they had achieved it. Humanity had promised to answer the call for help, and they had kept that promise. A communication request came through from the Valari leadership. The admiral nodded, and the holoscreen flickered to life. The Valari council appeared, their faces pale and weary, their voices trembling with emotion. "Admiral," the elder leader said, bowing his head. "We have no words. You came when no one else did. You risked your people, your lives, for us. Why? Why would you do this?" The admiral's expression did not change. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with the weight of truth. "Because you asked. That is enough." The chamber was silent. The Valari looked at one another, their eyes wide, their hearts heavy with the meaning of those words. Humanity had not come for gain, for conquest, or for reward. They had come because it was right. That alone made them different from any other race the Valari had ever known. Across the planet, the message spread. Valari survivors spoke of the humans who had fought like titans, who had stood like unbreakable walls, who had sacrificed their lives to save strangers. In every city, in every shelter, the name of humanity was spoken with awe. They were not just allies. They were saviors. They were hope. The Valari began rebuilding at once, their broken cities rising again with human aid. Engineers from Earth walked side by side with Valari builders, teaching, sharing, and helping. Human medical teams treated Valari wounded, their hands gentle, their voices kind. Where there had been despair, there was now life. And through it all, the human fleet remained in orbit, a shield above their new allies. The Valari children grew up watching the human ships in the skies. To them, those vessels were not machines of war, but symbols of protection. They would tell stories for generations of the day the stars answered their cry. In secret, the Valari Council met with the human admiral once more. They offered treasures, technology, and wealth as thanks. But the admiral refused. He shook his head, his voice firm. "We did not come for reward. Keep your gifts. Use them to rebuild your world. That is how you honor the lives we gave." The Valari bowed deeply, humbled beyond words. They had seen many species in the galaxy, but none like this. None who gave without asking. None who fought without demand. In the quiet after the war, stories began to spread beyond the Valari system. Other races heard whispers of what had happened. They heard of a people from a blue world, a people who answered when no one else would, a people who stood against impossible odds not for themselves, but for others. And across the galaxy, the name of humanity grew. Some feared it. Others admired it. All remembered it. For the Valari, the memory was carved forever into their hearts. They had once believed they were alone, fragile in the face of darkness. But then humanity had come, and everything had changed. On the flagship, as the fleet prepared to depart, the admiral gave his final words. The Valari will not stand alone again. If any cry for help reaches us, humanity will answer. That is who we are. The fleet turned toward the stars, their engines glowing like suns. The Valari watched them go, their hearts filled with both sorrow and joy. They knew the humans would move on, but they also knew they would never be forgotten. The enemy had expected to crush a weak race without resistance. They had not expected the entire human fleet to arrive. They had not expected humanity. And in that moment, the galaxy itself understood a new truth. Humanity was here. Humanity was rising. Humanity would never again be ignored.